of the Licensing Review Committee, or?
I called it the day-night doubleheader.
That's
Doubleheader.
It's a night-day doubleheader. We have a few housekeeping matters to attend to first before we discuss last night's public hearing. The first item is the approval of 3 sets of minutes, December 11th, January 29th, and February 12th. Everybody had a look at those minutes? Anybody have any proposed edits, revisions, comments, questions? Okay.
I actually thought they were very well done. Yeah.
Tracy does a terrific job. So I move that we approve the minutes of December 11th, January 29th, 2015, and February 12th, 2015, as submitted. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? Next, we have on our agenda a discussion of the visit to the Netta Cultivation Processing Site in Franklin. And I know, I think most of us were at that meeting. Peg, other than Peg, everybody was there.
Joe missed it.
Oh, Joe wasn't there. I first of all thank Netta for allowing us that opportunity. I thought it was very valuable from my point of view. I got to see the scale of the operation there, the seriousness and with which they take all issues there, from cleanliness to the security, to how serious they are about the purity of their products. I also got to see the financial investment that's just evident in the size of the operation and the amount of equipment and man hours that have gone into the planning and construction of it. So it helped me to understand our applicant a little bit better. And anybody have anything to add about that?
I certainly would say that when we talk about how the product will be cultivated, you really have to, it's very impressive to know that the seed will get a barcode that will be followed through the entire process to the point of whether the plant material is, the discarded material is tossed, or the upper part of the plant that will become the source of the extracting process will be tracked. It is, at least as we saw it set up, a quite remarkable system, which suggests to me that we can be reasonably assured that there will be monitoring of the product as it's being grown and produced. I felt quite reassured about that. So I came away with no more doubts about those components. I may have some other reservations, but not on that point.
Understood. Anybody want to add anything? All right. So I think we should have a general discussion about the hearing last night. I thought it was really quite an excellent hearing. I was impressed with as I usually am, by the citizens of Brookline and the people who participate in our town government at the level of the conversation that went on. It was a highly respectful conversation. It was the input was meaningful, was well thought out, well presented, and I think it warrants our public digestion of the information that we saw. Anybody have any comments they want to start with? I know a couple of us couldn't make it, but no. Well, I have a few points that I highlighted that I thought were worth discussion, and there might be a couple points that we want to re-examine as we wrap up this process of making recommendations to the Board of Selectmen. I think once we got people to focus on the real question, which was not whether you're in favor of medical marijuana or opposed to medical marijuana, or the considerations that were the criteria for the decision that the town meeting has discussed at last two town meetings about the siting of this particular location through zoning, and focused on the conditions that to be recommended to the Board of Selectmen. I thought we heard some interesting points, some of which we've heard before. The first one that I highlighted was I think it was Lisa Barstow who said we should be following the Newton model. She focused on a few aspects of the Newton model that we've discussed too, but one that I don't know that we've discussed enough yet, and one that came up in another context later, was the amount of purchasing, the amount of material that a patron of the dispensary can take with him or her. According to Lisa, Newton has a single ounce prohibition. A patron can only walk away with 1 ounce of material, and I'm not sure if that's true. Well, it also may be incorrect because we've talked a lot about the processing of raw marijuana into edibles and into tinctures, into other things, and I think we know that sometimes 1 ounce of material results in a very little amount of the processed product, and but still, when it comes to applying the standards of how much you're allowed to take with you, it's the source. The 1 ounce. If someone was limited to 1 ounce, they might not be able to get the full dose of the medicine that they want. But I want to make sure I got that right.
Yeah, that's clearly true. The 2 ounces, I believe, is for raw product, plant product. But I don't know that Newton's going to be able to do anything about tinctures and other, edibles and things like that, because as you said, and you basically start with 10 ounces, and when you extract the oils, you end up with a much smaller amount of tincture or any other product. So they may be talking just about the plant product, but if you're going to say 1 or 2 ounces, that's just not going to fly with patients who take their medicine in other ways rather than smoking it.
Well, I'm not so sure that's accurate, and that's part of why I was having an exchange about what a dose is and what an ounce is, because the reality is that when you get down to the extracted product, it seems to me 1 ounce is quite a few doses.
Well, it depends what you're talking about. You were talking about brownies, and by the way, there's...
No, I wasn't talking about any product at all. I was just
Okay,
talking
well,
about how you get from this dried plant material, the stuff that looks like my herbal bag.
Right.
How do you get from there to a product that's delivered to a patient?
Okay, well, there's 2 extraction methods for the oils, both of which we saw at the dispensary, and it is my understanding that you start with an ounce or 10 ounces of raw plant material, and then you extract the oils, and what you get is not necessarily, you get a lot less than 10 ounces of extracted oils. And so, I would defer to somebody who does this.
Well, I think
for a
we need to
living.
hear from the chemistry people. That's 2.5 ounces, all right?
Right,
That's
but
2.5 ounces of dried plant
Yeah,
product,
I
which is not what we're talking about.
Right. Well, I think what
I
Newton's talking about is 2 ounces of dried product.
that's my
Yeah,
question.
if it's dried
That's my
product,
question.
that makes a big difference compared to a dose in milligrams. That's my issue.
No, but my understanding is when you take that 2.5 ounces and then you process it down to the tincture or whatever of processed product, and then you apply and so you may not end up with a vial this big. When you apply the state regulation of no more than 10 ounces per day, sorry, you're right, no more than 10 ounces 60 days. That little vial would count as 2.5 ounces, even though the vial itself only weighs a few grams, perhaps. But
that few grams of liquid tincture may not be adequate, and you may need the 10 ounces to get to the amount of tincture that somebody would need for 60 days.
Right.
So
That's my understanding of how this works, and but I wanted to address the point.
Well, there's a mathematical ratio, okay, that is 6.7 to 1 with regard to reduction. That's apparently in the state regulations. But the question that I have, which is a different one, has to do with what is appropriate dosage, which has zip to do with 10 ounces of dried plant material.
But the dosage is going to be up to the clinicians.
That's right, but the dosage is still calculated based on 10 ounces of dried plant material. It's Looney Tunes.
No, but it's not. You take the 10 ounces and you convert. If you converted that into, you've extracted the oils from that.
If it turns out that 10 ounces would give you mega doses beyond what any medical condition could possibly demand, how would you deal with that?
Well, that's just like any prescription medicine. I mean, when
it means that if it's too much, you can still have it all?
That's right. When you go in for your prescription of oxycodone, they don't give you one dose. They give you what could be a lethal dose if you took it all. If you took it all at once. I don't see the flaw, but.
The petitioner shall limit on-site transactions to 1 ounce of medical marijuana, that doesn't specify the form, or its equivalent, in whatever form the medical marijuana is dispensed per customer site visit, with the balance of the order delivered to customers' homes.
So they've kind of skipped the issue, it seems to me. They haven't said that the 1 ounce is...
Or equivalent.
Or equivalent. It says or equivalent. So...
With the balance delivered.
The balance being...
Well, that's
how much
could be up
is
to 10
it?
ounces.
Up to 10
Right,
ounces?
yeah. So the 1 ounce is just the site visit. That's a big difference.
I have a general question
Go
about
ahead, Ed.
Newton. Somebody from Newton told me, and I have no idea if it's true, that they're rethinking the delivery only and stuff like that. Does anybody know what the status is? Just in terms of people comparing what we're doing to Newton, I don't know if...
I could make a phone call and find out, but I don't currently.
Betsy, is your concern the possibility that the dispensary is going to sell 10 ounces of plant product as
They
opposed?
can, legally.
I understand that. So is that your main concern?
It's part of it. My real concern is what's a healthy dose. I don't think anybody knows.
Well,
they don't know. I don't
But
know.
isn't that a DPH issue?
It should be.
An Allen issue?
It should be.
Well,
But DPH said 10 ounces, so GPH is clueless.
I don't agree with that. And
All right, but wait a minute. Let's be on the regulatory, all right? The 10 ounces may or may not be fair and enough. But what I'm trying to say is that with regard to oxycodone, in spite of its possible misuse, there is medical, clinical evidence for what a dose of oxycodone is. There is no medical, clinical evidence for what is a proper dose of a derivative of marijuana.
Well, I don't think that's true either. I think that there's an emerging literature, starting with Health Canada, that looks at different conditions and different doses. But you're right. Individuals require different amounts of medicine based on body mass, based on all kinds of factors. So there's no one-size-fits-all for this, just as there's no one-size-fits-all for any pharmaceutical. And any doc who says there is just not telling it right. So I believe that it will be up to the clinician and the patient together. And there were some patients last night who knew what their dose was.
Right.
They had experimented with different formulations, with edibles, with tinctures, with lozenges, and they could tell you what their dose was, and people, when they start using the medicine, will be able to tell you after a few months what the correct dose for their particular condition is. So I'm not as worried about that part of it, but I think what's going to happen is there's going to be people doing clinical research on these issues to give physicians and others guidance on what is generally an appropriate dose for a particular condition. Nobody's going to tell you that if you have colitis, it's the same dose that somebody who has, chronic pain. And by the way you get the medicine will be completely different for those two conditions. So you're right. There is no there's no handbook that said, there's no formulary, there's no handbook. By the way, there was a formulary for this up until the 40s, but then it went bye-bye. So there will be, just as there was back then, the desk referencing will include this in a couple of years. I'm absolutely certain of it.
Well, my objection is the definition of a dose and what an ounce is, all right? I'm not prepared to limit the amount somebody can take away because I don't think we know what that 1 ounce is. My issue has to do with what is medically reasonable, and I do not believe we have the data to be able to say.
I'm not going to argue that point.
Well, that's why the point that this is really the DPH's issue
Right.
is.
But where my concern is critical to our regulatory process is disclosure. I'm going to really, really speak personally and strongly in favor of good, detailed disclosure. And I just brought in, this is what I get. I get eye drops for have a type of glaucoma. My pharmacy gives me this with every prescription. My actual bottle of drops contains this, most of which I have never read and probably won't. But my point here is that anybody taking a product for which we have none of this data at all should know what they're getting and what the harmful possible effects of it may be and what the beneficial effects of it are. And so my issue has got to do with disclosure and packaging.
Well, again, I think that's a DPH issue rather than a town of Brookline. I don't think we have the resources to dictate what kind of information
We can require information.
needs
We might
to
not
go
say-
in there.
You know, I think that first of all, DPH does require certain amounts of information, and I think we can require, the amount of which cannabinoids and levels of THC. There are things we can require and which will be tested for. So I don't think it has to be as long as that. But
I just gave you an example of what the real pharmaceutical industry does.
So I think we have a role to play in terms of the packaging and the transparency. And I think we do have some language that maybe has been proposed that's used elsewhere.
Yeah, your packets include pages 33 and 34 from the Colorado packaging regulations. And you'll see in bold some packaging requirements on warnings.
Warning, Will Robinson.
So it says 3 at the bottom of 33. There may be,
The following warning statements.
I go from 33 to
34.
47 in mine for some reason.
I could go
No,
47.
different document.
That's a different document.
Very end.
Back. Very end.
Ken, very end. There you go.
Oh, there we go. So I'm going to read them out loud. There may be health risks associated with the consumption of this product. I mean, does our state regulation already have something to that effect?
Well, we have the
Those?
packaging DPH requirements in here also, in the packets also.
DPH was more general.
There's a one-page memo I did, just block copy. It's actually not a memo, it's just a one-page block copy from the DPH regulations on packaging and labeling. It looks like this.
And what we may do is we could suggest language, and we could say to NET that they could come back with another proposal that we would, entertain.
All right. Let me go back to reading them then.
It's got a lot of the detail. Actually, what I saw at the site visit was confirmation that item number 2, the labeling, where it talks about the qualifying patient, the registration number of the product, all of that strikes me as being fully under control through the production process. That is different from there may be health risks associated with the consumption of this product, and the product is infused with marijuana. I think it must also say what the marijuana content is, what the cannabis content is. There are a variety of different plant materials with different intoxicating components, and those guys know what those things are, even if I don't, but I wouldn't want to have a package in my hand that didn't tell me which kind it was.
And on the second page, so everyone sees that, there's a warning, for edibles, the intoxicating effects of this product may be delayed by 2 or more hours. There's a warning about driving or operating heavy machinery under the influence and some other things.
Okay. Well, we're on to labeling here, by the way. Somehow we've made the transition. We're talking about
I wasn't
this
really trying to
maximum
force that point.
dose
I was just
of
saying
that.
that's what my concern was.
But that was one of my takeaways from last night too, was the labeling point. So let me read these Colorado warnings out loud. There may be health risks associated with the consumption of this product. This product is infused with marijuana. Duh. This product was produced without regulatory oversight for health, safety, or efficacy. The
That's correct.
The intoxicating effects of this product may be delayed by 2 or more hours. There may be additional health risks associated with the consumption of this product for women who are pregnant, breastfeeding, or planning on becoming pregnant, and do not drive or a motor vehicle or operate heavy machinery while using marijuana. So,
And for the benefit-
any comments on whether those would be appropriate warnings that we should require?
I don't believe the regulatory oversight one is fair in this case, because I think there's lots of that. So I would certainly not.
Let's hear from our applicant on that.
I would recommend it to come up here, Arnon.
My short comment is that
I'm sorry, can you tell us your name?
Sure. Arnon Verd, I'm the executive director of NETA, and I live in Swampscott. I recommend that we take a look at the Department of Health regulations that deals with labeling, because a lot of the comments that we're making are there, as opposed to looking at the adult use recreational regulations from Colorado. So let's just start with what we're actually going to do, which of course includes mentioning what is the THC percentage. Some of these warnings are there. I mean, let's just look at what we're actually going to do. That's all.
Well, actually, according to what we've got, MH is only requiring that the things that are what I would consider technical issues, having to do with tracking, having to do with the quantity of usable marijuana as measured in ounces. You guys are going to use milliliters, not ounces, so you've got to do a conversion because the base is ounces, as you and I have been discussing.
Yep.
I wouldn't know personally if I got something in ounces or milliliters, which was what. The kinds of data they want are the batch and serial number. We know you're going to do that based on the demonstration in your production process. But it does not include the types of warnings that are included in the Colorado one,
right?
which has to do with the
If I may, Selectwoman.
risks of delayed reaction or delayed impact, and also driving, because we know statistically now people who are stopped across the country, AAA has a statistical report that says that now there is an increase in individuals who are either injured or impaired and are diagnosed as having marijuana in their blood, okay? So you've got to disclose the risks. That's my position.
We agree 100%, and that is definitely a core part of the regulatory framework is proper information for consumers, and in this case for medical marijuana patients. So as regards the black letter of what's required on the labels themselves, 105 CMR, the medical marijuana regulations by the DPH, requires this statement: this product has not been analyzed or approved by the FDA. There is limited information on the side effects of using this product. There may be associated health risk. Do not drive or operate machinery when under the influence of this product. And in all bold, keep this product away from children. So certainly if there are disclosures that from a public health point of view, particularly I like the idea of the delayed response. That's one that took us a while to get to in Colorado, so that might be useful, and I think that's a very good idea. But what we don't want is redundancy, right? I mean, there's only...
No, I don't think we would say different. We wouldn't repeat what's included in the Department of Public Health. But for anything that should be included, that's not on the
Yeah.
DPH list.
Right.
I think our responsibility is to try to make sure there's
I agree.
sufficient disclosure. And back to the other sort of organic chemistry technical stuff, which is beyond my comprehension, I still do not understand how you translate ounces to milliliters in order for the consumer to know what portion of 10 ounces does this represent, all right? If it's a lozenge, if it's a tablet, and whatever the product is, I don't get it. I have no way of understanding that.
So let me first address your first question about education. My biggest problem is actually that document that you have there, which is the fine print. So before I was involved in all this, I once had the job in credit cards. And in credit cards, you certainly get those disclosures that nobody reads. And I made a pledge that when I'm going to this specific role, we're not going to be in the same situation. So the key to this is not having a document like that with a lot of fine print, is actual education. Which means that when somebody comes in and stands for the first time in front of one of our counselors or people that are standing in Brookline, they're going to go through patient education. They have to go and both read our patient handbook and confirm that they've done it. We're going to do patient certification. So the key is not to say, hey, somewhere in font that's not smaller than 10-point size, this is something and we all feel good about it. The key is what kind of actual education we're going to do and how do we verify that the education happens. And a lot of the things that we talked about and a lot more has been created by our team in our patient handbook, which is something that I know you started to taking a look at, and we're going to increase what's going to happen there. So education is the key, but doing it for real. So that's our approach to that. So that's beyond labeling in something in fine print. That's something that's going to fit on this tiny little package. So that's our approach to that. And then when it comes to ounces and milliliters, here's what's important. What's important is that people understand what they're taking. And what some of the issues that happen in other places is when people didn't understand what they were taking. So all products that Neta are going to have a 10 milligram version. That is a very, very small dosage. Certainly for patients who have been using it for a while, some of the patients that we saw yesterday. But so all of our products are going to have that version for it. However, for some people who already have some experience and they know that eating one brownie of 10 milligrams is not going to make an impact for them, then they're going to take 50, etc. So the focus is what patients need, want, and it's going to work for them. And the focus is really on the milligrams because that appears to be, from everything that we're seeing for patients and doctors, is the unit of measure that people focus on to do the right thing for them.
Okay,
That's it.
and just to be clear, there's two separate and confusing measurements going on. One is the state says how many ounces in 60 days.
Right.
And so I would refer to, again, what I get normally. It tells me how many refills I can have up until X date. Maybe part of the solution is to say this dose is whatever percentage of what you're allowed and let people know what or maybe it's not the dose, it's the whatever you give. Let's just say
we have that.
it's a bottle of capsules or a bottle of tincture. Then it should also let people know what portion of their 10-ounce allowance that represents and how many refills, because part of what your job will be, we all know, is tracking that people don't exceed their allowances.
And we have to do that by regulation, right? So
Yeah.
we have to put on the label, even if we're talking milligrams because that's how patients and
Yeah,
doctors
all right,
look
so
at it.
you're
We have to put the
going to
ounces too.
dispense milligrams even though the allowance is measured in ounces.
But the disclosure that we have to do is in ounces. So when they receive something, it has to say, and we already started designing the label. We just finished that yesterday. It's going to say in ounces. So it's going to be very clear. And as you know, people who are using tinctures or things like that, potentially the amount of ounces is not going to be that large because 10 milligrams
Right.
is
Right.
a little tiny bit. So that's not going to be an issue for the 10 ounces. And let me just make one comment about the 10 ounces that I think is really important to keep context to all of this. The reason why the Department of Health came up with that number is because just like the session that we had yesterday, there were the listening sessions. And they received a lot of input from patients and patient advocates, and that's how they got to that number. The reality is, what do most patients do? If we're talking about raw flour, it's 1.6 ounces per month. That's on average. But there are some patients who require more. That's between the patient and the doctor, as we talked about. But that's kind of how we got to that point. But in reality, the overwhelming majority, 90 some, are not going to be even close to that.
What's the source of that statistic of 1.6 ounces of plant material?
That
per
we
month?
looked at other medical marijuana jurisdictions over the last 4 to 5 years: Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Washington, Oregon. So on average, that's what we're seeing.
I mean, that's what they buy, or
That's what they buy, the
use?
consumption rates.
That's what's prescribed.
That's what the sales tax records and, the documents that the regulated industry has to keep tell us.
Just for the record, 10 ounces is 283,500 milligrams,
Okay.
but they're going to be dispensed in milligrams, right?
Yes, I mean, Selectman DeWitt, it's.
Sorry, this is
there-
my
there-
obsession,
there
but I
is an-
just want
there is
people
an
to know what they're
equation.
getting.
There is an equation, but on the other hand, you're dealing with raw marijuana, which traditionally has been measured in ounces, and you're dealing with pharmaceuticals, which traditionally have been
Sure, and all I'm saying is that
designated in
the
milligrams, so
patient
it's
and
natural
the
that there
person-
should be
all right,
two levels
right,
of,
but
two
the
scales
people
here.
who are worrying about how much is being taken away may have a complete misconception about what is being taken away by a patient, all right, or what a dose is. And this is part of, in a way, I'm agreeing, education and disclosure is very important.
But I think the core of your concern is diversion, though. It's not so much,
Sure.
I mean, and so for us, perhaps dosage is the wrong way to get there. We have an ongoing responsibility to be aware of any suspicious activity. We have an ongoing responsibility to deny service if we believe on a reasonable basis that there's a basis in fact to do so, and we have to report that immediately to the Department of Public Health, any individual incidents where we refuse service to a patient, and so they can further investigate. They've invested millions of dollars in this parallel to a prescription monitoring system, an online portal, which we all have to take training on, and which will keep live tabs statewide of what patients consume. So there are safeguards in place, and for us, and I guess ethically, the problem is, and as we heard last night, for a regulatory body to get in between the doctor and the patient and to try to mandate a priori what a dose should be. So if we're talking about public safety,
That's
we're talking
not my
about
concern,
diversion.
just to be really clear.
Sure.
I'm not mandating a dose, I'm describing a dose. I want both patient and everybody else to know what the content
Absolutely.
of the product is.
I agree with that.
And I want it to be disclosed in language that people can understand. And frankly, I still think there's a lot of confusion about what is a milligram, milliliter, whatever form, it's either dry weight or liquid, it gets dispensed in centa as opposed to ounces. That's all.
So just, I mean,
It
literally,
is confusing.
if you look at the label, I mean, it literally is going to be the name of the strain. It's going to say, well, somewhere it's going to say netta, and then below it is going to say number of ounces. At the back, it's going to say the milligrams because people need to understand, because that's really how
Because
people
that's how
shop,
they will understand their dose.
which is great.
Yeah,
But
right.
we essentially have to do both,
Okay.
and both are going to be there.
If both are there, then I will be much happier.
And that's DPH regulation, so
And-
we're really covered.
I would like to highlight again your idea about the, kind of go slow and wait language or something to that equivalent. That wasn't in the first round of Colorado regulations, and now it is, and it's there for a reason.
And I gather that's part of
So-
what they enacted in February based on more recent
Patty?
Molly
information.
Ivins found that out.
Yeah.
Patty?
Just for everyone's information, I did call Kay Hodge, that's another lawyer, Kay Doyle from DPH General Counsel, Deputy General Counsel, just to question her about DPH's position on edibles and regulating them. They are aware of the Colorado regulations. They are following what's coming out in the medical literature about this on edibles. And she did say as we all know, there's a change in administration. The new administration is looking at state regulations globally. And so she didn't know when DPH would actually be able to take up the question of edibles regulation.
Okay, so I'd like to bring this back to practical terms here. So what I'm sensing is that there is a consensus on this board that we should supplement the existing DPH regulations with a couple of things that are, we see in the Colorado regulations, namely the requiring the statement on the labeling that the intoxicating effects of the product may be delayed by 2 or more hours. And I don't know if the pregnant women breastfeeding part is currently in the state regulations or not, but
It's not stated on the state website.
seems to me that one should be
Yeah,
in there
yeah.
too. So I'd like in preparation
5 and 6.
for our next draft for town,
Oh,
right,
sorry,
4 and 5, for town council to add that to our proposed conditions for recommend to the Board of Selectmen that those 2 labeling items be added, unless there's something else that people
Oh,
think.
there is one other thing in here, and I'm not still clear. It sounded to me as though this will be part of what was anticipated in the labeling, but if you look on page 34, item C, serving size is X and product contains X servings, which would be part of what I was looking for in a way of explaining the content of the product. But also, when you say what this is, it should be, and what you're saying to me is you're going to put the THC content on one side of the label, or in part of the label, and the ounce content in the other part of the label.
No,
It'll be clearly labeled, both as to potency, ingredients.
Right.
One fine distinction, though, Selectwoman, is that, Selectman, I'm sorry, is that
That's all right.
this is retail marijuana regulations, so
Yeah.
when they're talking, this is adult use, non-medical regulations that we're looking at here in Colorado, the ones that we're referring to. So when you talk about serving size.
Well, dose is what I'm talking about.
Sure,
I'm
sure.
just simply saying what seems to me important for disclosure is that kind of language with regard to a dose. And all I'm trying to say is that it should be treated more or less the same way this is, so
Right.
that a patient has information that describes what the dose is, what is appropriate, once every 4 hours, whatever the
Sure.
kinds of things that normally go into a prescription.
And that kind of goes in, we've been dealing with regulated pharmaceuticals for many, many decades, obviously. This is an issue of first impression for this jurisdiction. The one thing to consider, sort
Maybe
of.
guys could just give us some samples?
Sure.
Yeah,
Why don't you do that?
I was about to say that
Yeah.
I think that some of these conditions are good, but you might find it strange, but I think it's far from enough. This is just the beginning of what we need to do from education. We already have, and we should add a lot more to, we can add these 3, and we should add another 10. And the way to do it is through education. So our plans are both through, and we can share with you some of that information, through the patient handbook, and specifically when somebody is getting a more of a high dosage edible, as we discussed yesterday, they will receive a sheet. It's not just with, you need to know, we need to give them instructions, we need to give them case studies, we need to talk to them. So there's a lot that needs to go. What I would recommend is that, I don't think that this is enough. I think this is like beyond minimum. Let us present to you some of the educational material that we want to create. See how comprehensive they are. If you think that they're not comprehensive enough, we need to add something more. Great, let's do that. But let's do it
Okay.
in reality, and we can do that. I know that we have the meetings and the yearly. Sure. How about we just submit it to you, and we have a conversation about it, and let's make it better together.
Okay.
We had the application form requests your patient education material,
Exactly.
so submit them now.
Yep.
If they're ready.
Perfect.
Is there something specific you'd like to be in our proposed conditions
Well-
about the measurement? Are we gonna, we could save this till the selectmen.
Maybe we can see what what they submit, and it may be sufficient. Then all I would want to do is be sure that it's incorporated into the licensing, that that's what they do, all right? And that's
Okay.
my bottom line, but the specifics are still.
Let's move on to another topic from last night's hearing then. Does anybody want to revisit the home delivery aspect of that? We heard it from a couple of speakers last night, both for and against that issue of home delivery emanating from the dispensary itself, or whether it should emanate from the distribution center in Ashland.
Or the way our language is not that it specifies Franklin, but just not from Brookline.
Franklin, not Ashland.
We don't have loading facilities at the Brookline site, so
Right.
I think Franklin as the source is the only way to do it.
I don't think the people said that gave any reason.
I don't think they understood, frankly, the issues that have to do with traffic and just the logistics.
All right, so
I think what should be clear, and it's our understanding, and you, NETA folks, can speak to this, is that they have the capacity to do home deliveries if that's what the patient desires.
I want to spend maybe like 30 seconds on the logistics of it, so just to understand what we're really talking about. When we talk about delivery from Brookline, it means that one of our vans that I think you actually saw when you went to Franklin stops by the door. We have this special black box that is secure and all that. It's kind of military grade. You take that box, you put it on the car, because all the manifesting and signage is done already inside, so you don't even have to. They take the box, they put it on the car, and the car drives away. That's it. So from a traffic perspective, it's like one car stops, takes it, and goes out. We're talking about, you can probably measure it in, depending on how fast we do it, but maybe not seconds, but certainly minutes. That's it. So, I mean, if we want to regulate it, we don't do that, and everything comes from Franklin, we're not going to, severely object to it, but it's a minor thing.
Okay. And on, with all due respect, this is a committee meeting right now. I mean, it's not that we have people who are, critical of these regulations in this application at the table right now. So I'm glad you're here. We'll ask you, but let's let the committee take control of it right now. Okay?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. I mean, we probably would have asked you the question, but
I apologize.
Thanks. Delivery options. I don't think we're going to go back into the delivery subject. Appointment only.
Did we finish talking about the limit on takeout and home delivery balance the Newton model? I don't know. Did we close that already?
I mean, I don't think there's a reason to discuss that any further. I think I'm convinced by what I've heard about why delivery from Franklin, home delivery should emanate from Franklin, not from Brookline. And I'm also convinced that to require all, subsequent purchases to be home delivered rather than emanate from the dispensary, why that doesn't make sense and why that's not necessary, leaving open the option that in future licensing years that might be required.
But it's important to say a couple of things. One, this is going to come up for review annually, so you can always revisit that.
Yep.
And I would even go so far as to say that for practical reasons, we know the dispensary is going to hold original visits as appointments. And we've heard that they're proposing a substantial education component. It is very probable that after the first 6 weeks or so, when only everybody comes by appointment, it's going to be a run-in, run-out thing, and it wouldn't be that different from going to a Walgreens or a CVS, or a bank to do an ATM transaction.
So up to 10 ounces on takeout without requirement for home delivery portion. Okay.
All right. Shifting gears again, we heard from three different people last night about full disclosure of finances, financial flow, and then there was some specific suggestions made about the owner, the manager of the LLC that owns the Brookline Bank building, and some suggestion made that we should be looking more closely at that.
Do we have the authority to talk about the?
Well, that was my first question too. So.
Patty?
Yeah, I don't see it as something that really is within licensing to look at the owner of the building. But we have in your packets, there is a markup of certain conditions that, in going through the minutes,
Second to last piece.
it says proposed conditions 325 draft. And So these are a few things. There's something on edibles at the top and at the end, if we want to discuss that. But most pertinent to this point that Chairman Goldstein is raising is the inclusion now of an independent financial audit of the licensee prepared by a licensed CPA for the preceding fiscal year. So that's proposed to be added. It's something we've discussed. It was overlooked, frankly, on my part in not having included it earlier.
And that's part of the renewal process, and there would be an actual review at that point by the selectmen of those
Well,
materials.
or the licensing actually usually goes through this committee, too. So,
The renewal would,
yeah.
I mean, unless
Oh,
they're
that's
retrue.
true, yeah. But they're also, in their original application, just to be clear, had to submit financial information.
So that's part of the initial application,
Yeah.
and then this audited financial would be part of the annual review, or could be part of the
And
annual.
that is part of the application now as well. Our application includes that in those same questions that DPH asked, because they may have changed over the past year since.
I think the people who spoke about this last night were suggesting that there should be something beyond this. I think they were not so concerned with the, well, they were somewhat concerned with the finances of the operation as it stands, but they're also concerned with the flow, you know, where the profits are going and you know, a level of investigation beyond, you know, beyond the shell of the company itself.
What is the questions that we added, Patty? Where are those two questions?
Well, the application is not in the
That's not part of
materials.
the condition.
But I can read you what they are. I have a copy, sure.
I think that one of those questions addresses the concerns that you just raised.
Pardon me?
Proposed conditions that Patty's talking about?
No, this is in the application.
Oh, in the application, okay.
We put it in the app, well,
Yeah.
maybe we don't have that many.
No, I do. I have to find it. I mean, this is a question whether there's a public safety need for it, or, you know, if the selectmen really want to spend time going into detail. But let me find the application. Just give me a minute.
While you're doing that, can we just clarify, you don't own the building, is that correct? You're
Nope.
leasing this building? Okay.
When we talk about doing an independent financial audit of the licensee, we're talking about an audit that will reflect the entire company, not limited to the Brookline location, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
I believe that's how it's worded, isn't it? In the condition, the draft conditions that I passed out, it says, an independent financial audit of the licensee. And I do have those two questions that were added to the application form. The first one, again, these are DPH's language. Provide a narrative summary of projected capital expenses to build up both the proposed dispensary and cultivation or processing facilities and attach a copy of the proposed capital budget. Provide a narrative summary of the proposed one-year RMD operating budget, including projected revenues by sales type, line item, operating expenses, and budget assumptions, and include the budget as an attachment.
Okay, well, I mean, it doesn't go into what I was getting from the people who spoke last
What
night,
about to know about
who
LLC?
really want to go beyond the shell of the LLC and go into the cash flow to the members and the shareholders and the people behind the LLC. I just don't know that that's our function in this.
We have not done it with other businesses. I don't know to what extent
Well, we don't-
DPH is going to be.
We don't license a
doing
lot of
this
other
then.
businesses, but unless I hear from other board members, I'm not inclined to go there, but if other committee members think that that's something that we should be exploring, I'm open to the argument.
Is the independent financial audit something that has to be provided to DPH as well on an annual basis?
I'm not aware that it is.
No, so
Initial applicant, you had to just submit financial.
But not annually.
I'll try to answer. So, no, you don't have to submit it annually. And the reason why, this was a question that the committee asked last time, and I just want to answer it. Why did the DPH ask for financials in the first place? They did it because they wanted to see the business plan, and they wanted to see the level of investment, and they need people know what they're doing. And before the DPH actually did that process, believe it or not, we did the same DPH process with the other applicants. because there was a period of time which we didn't know if we want to start NETA or we actually just want to give money to other entities. So I actually looked over the financials of many of the applicants and actually license holders that already have it right now. And I've learned a lot from it about their ability to actually perform and actually put the right level of investment and just understand financials in general. That was the reason for that. So the DPH asked exactly what Patty just mentioned, and of course we're ready to submit that. But I think that's it. We want to submit what we submitted to the DPH and call it a day. I think from a public safety perspective, I'm not sure that there's.
Well, I think, Arnon, that you had agreed NETA would provide audited financials at a prior meeting. You had said that. So, and that was discussed, and I put it in the draft because.
So we had discussions. There's a couple of elements to it. One is we wanted to make sure, we wanted to understand what the DPH is actually requiring, and what the DPH is requiring is not that. And the second piece is there's the element of Brookline looking at overall net and looking at what are we doing in Franklin, what are we doing in Northampton, trying to regulate some of that. I'm not sure certainly what from a public safety perspective the goal is. New England Treatment Access is a not-for-profit. Section 180, both the DPH is regulating us, not necessarily so much from a financial perspective. Secretary of State, the Attorney General. So we had some discussions about it, and
Yeah,
I think that what we submit to the state is what we should be submitting to you.
I think that we had discussions about the reasons. Chairman Goldstein and others on the committee had explained them, and you did represent that you would provide, NETA would provide the audited
And
financials.
I'll restate it too. I mean, let's not ignore the elephant in the room. Marijuana is currently and has been for many years a black market commodity, and which huge illegal profits have been made. And I think it's in the interest of the public to have an idea of, as this market transforms into a legal one, that it's not resulting in the kinds of dramatically inequitable profits that characterize the black market. So
I would agree.
I think there's a legitimate reason for keeping a tight watch on the finances, at least in the early years.
I think it's within the licensure purview of the town as well. I mean, if we look at liquor licenses, we ask the applicants to attest every year that the officers and directors in the corporation or members in the LLC that hold a liquor license are the same. And the reason why the state also looks into financials is to see where the money is coming from. So the question for the citizens and for public safety is to make sure that on a regular basis we understand who's involved with these enterprises. And so
we agree with that.
I think the discussion is certainly appropriate, and these proposed conditions speak a little bit to that. And I reviewed the letters from the citizens, so I think more we can tell you.
And oddly, in the case of liquor, partly because of our tax structure, we have a different oversight and regulatory system in place, state and locally. Whereas, frankly, you guys are in a new world where as Selectman Goldstein has said, the only basis for comparison is an illegal drugs market. This is you're a health provider. There's no health insurance involved. You can charge whatever the market will bear, and that may or may not be appropriate, and we need to know about that. And that's a matter of transparency and disclosure.
I don't know if you've met Joe Hanley yet. He's a member of the LRC. He's also a licensing attorney for many years. Joe, did you have any suggestions on addressing the points raised in the letters on this topic?
Well, I mean, a lot of the comments speak to parking, which I think maybe relates more to the special permit process.
I was thinking more about what Chairman Goldstein's point
On
about
the finances, Patty's asking.
Yeah. I think a lot of them, I mean, some of these comments are already addressed in the proposed conditions. A lot of this is about disclosure and transparency, which, again, is completely in the purview of the town for licensure. We require disclosure from food licensees at the CV level. And it's not uncommon that applicants are nonprofits, but, I think that the renewal process, there's an opportunity in the application process for, for that disclosure. As I read those letters, there's concerns as to who is involved. The trickier issue is sort of the financial aspect and how it relates to public safety and disclosure from a town licensing. So we look at this at the original application point from a liquor license standpoint, and I think, because this is novel and there's an issue of public health and public safety, we ought to be even more careful as you get started. So.
And just to clarify, as a matter of state licensure, any individual that has any financial interest whatsoever in the company has to submit fingerprints in a very, very thorough background check, as well as dispensary agents themselves. Certainly a main concern of the state regulators was to ensure that these are legitimate funds that are financing these organizations, and they have dug very, very deep into the backgrounds of all of our financiers. We only have one. So, that certainly is something that has been looked at and covered by the state.
It's a good point. How static is that? So, you've looked at I wouldn't say industry because it is a nonprofit here, but you've looked at this in other states. How often does that change? How often do the officers change? How often does the financing change? In other words, should the public know if there's an investment that happens 6 months after opening?
Sure. So the key, we are, of course, in Colorado at least, the most heavily regulated industry in the state. Anytime there is a substantial change to the license and the financiers and the people that have an interest in the license, including even managers of the store themselves, we have to notify the regulators. So anytime there is a new loan, we have to get the actual lender to fill out a form to give us fingerprints and to register the loan with state regulators. I think you're absolutely right that there needs to be, from a public safety point of view, extra scrutiny as to the finances of these organizations, and the state regulators that really look at these more comprehensively as an application packet. Who are these people and where is the money from is really the two things they investigate through that thoroughly.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Joe, perhaps what I propose, it sounds like we're going to be meeting again anyway on some of these. Perhaps, Joe, I can show you what's in the application form, what's in the regs. We can review that together, and I can get your feedback. Okay.
Just
Do that offline.
a different financial related issue, and I don't think it came up yesterday, but people did ask about it earlier, and it seems appropriate, at least for us to be clear, whether we have any interest in any kind of condition, was to do with the amount of cash that might be required for purchases, because we know that there were some restrictions on banking transactions, and there was even I think we were asked whether an ATM machine whether we should forbid having an ATM machine on the premises or nearby. And I'm just interested in knowing what NETA has arranged with regard to payments.
We have a bank account. We can, run payroll through it. We will also have the capacity to have credit card and debit card transactions. We have a credit card processor that I use in Colorado. That's a national processor. So, we should be the same as any other business, on Washington Avenue.
And just to add to that, every day there's going to be a Brinks-like, I can't remember the name of the company, but a Brinks-like truck that's going to come, and they come every day to grab the cash and take it to our bank account.
Where are they going to park?
13 spaces.
Yeah.
They're going to come at randomized time during the day. We have a whole protocol around it.
So just to be clear, there was a sort of side issue which also had to do with cash, and that was that people coming to and leaving the premises, on their way to the premises, might be carrying cash, and makes them a sort of a target. So the ability to use credit cards as opposed to requiring cash should alleviate some of those concerns.
All right, well, that traffic and parking's been mentioned a moment ago, and that was kind of the last area of that I had asterisk from the conversation from last night. Somebody said a moment ago, and I agree, that I think this is the domain of the special permit process more than it is the domain of the licensing process. So I am counting on a planning board and ZBA to look carefully at the parking and traffic considerations. However, I did hear in the very last comment from last night a suggestion that the monitoring of traffic in our proposed conditions right now may not be sufficient, and I thought we'd explore that.
Peter Ditto's here. I don't know if it would be helpful to bring him up and have him talk about the traffic plan.
Can we review what we're currently recommending for the monitoring of traffic and the reaction to traffic, and whether that needs to be beefed up?
Under the Peter Ditto, Director of Engineering and Transportation. Under the Transportation Demand Management Plan, I believe there's three different points in time when there will be a study done. Bear with me for a minute.
There is one other thing that was brought up last night, and it's in some of the correspondence that we also, I think, need to address. It seems to me people were asking whether the conditions should address hours of operation. And I don't know if we want to be specific about that or not, but I know a number of people have raised that question.
I can't put my hand on right now, but I believe there was supposed to be, right after the startup, there was going to be an initial survey of the how the management plan is being implemented. Yeah. Yes. Okay. On the plan, it shows 3 months following the issuance of certificate of occupancy, there'll be a study, and repeated again at approximately 15 months after certificate of occupancy is issued. So there's, and this is a study has several parts to it. One's where they're doing a 15-minute count of the cars coming into the parking lot. And also there is a video that will be set up that will focus on any queuing on Route 9. I believe that the study will be reported to the town 30 days after completion, and they'll be doing it 2 days during the week at an agreed upon time by the Transportation Division. We can look at this scope of work and see if there's any deficiencies in it and close that loop if need be.
Okay. Everybody see it's condition 8 in our proposed conditions now is the transportation element of this.
And Mr. Ditto is referring to the transportation plan that's in your materials on page 4 in the middle.
Condition 8, and specifically addressing the question of monitoring, says that the Director of Transportation and Engineering shall determine performance monitoring and records of any remedial actions with traffic studies to be conducted approximately 3 months, 9 months, and 15 months following receipt of a certificate of occupancy. I think that's pretty strict standard, and I think we can expect a lot of opportunity to respond to traffic issues, but I know since it's a concern, I thought I'd raise it. Yes.
I didn't understand the issue that Abby Swan raised.
Yeah, well, that's who I'm referring to also.
And I don't know if anybody can speak to that.
Well,
The assumptions, having to do with the assumptions in the study?
Yeah.
Just for everyone's information, for the public's information, the full transportation document is posted on the Google site with the traffic study.
I mean, what I took from her comment was, and it was getting late, was she wanted to make sure there was enough opportunity to monitor and then react to the the traffic conditions there, which are somewhat of an unknown at this point. So I went back to what we're proposing right now. I think it's sufficient, but if other people don't, then I'd like to hear it.
My only thought was, in the proposed conditions, the 325 draft, number 8, evidence of licensing continuing implementation of compliance with performance goals of the traffic management plan, transportation management plan. You might want to tighten that up and, require a written report outlining compliance. There's some good stuff in the stand type report on the second page about PFAS subsidies and on-site bicycle storage, and basically encouraging employees to commute not by car, and to subsidize their parking. I don't know the science behind this, whether 30% is the right subsidy or not, and maybe that's the job of the zoning board at the special permit. But if that science is accepted, the applicant should really detail that in the written report. I guess evidence may be more broad, but I'd require an actual report and take a look at it, because there's some pretty good potential mitigation there.
That's something that transportation will be asking for?
Yeah, I think that's part of the TDM plan to begin
Get a
with right
report.
now, that report, with all that information you're asking for.
It seems like this might be something really for the expertise of transportation.
Or at least because we do have it by reference in our conditions, maybe we want to say review by transportation board in some fashion. I mean, just to sort of plug, I think that's a good point. We, as licensing agency, if we have no report or feedback, how do we know, so to speak?
We could require submission of reports submitted
I mean,
to-
the report, theoretically, there would be a report to the transportation board, right? It's just a matter that it be included with the licensing.
Yeah, and I think it would be good for the Board of Selectmen and the public to know,
Yeah,
whether it's
yeah.
a year later, that, okay, how many folks are receiving subsidies
Mhm,
from the T?
yeah.
How many of your employees are commuting by alternative means? How's that working? Rather than a document that was executed a year ago, just to make sure the public sees that there's some sort of compliance.
I think it's a good
So
suggestion.
you put a report, add to the reporting, and that seems to cover that. And while we're on page 2, item 7 says licensee shall ensure that its hours of operation and hours and methods of transportation of products shall not be a detriment to the surrounding area and nearby users. When we do alcoholic beverage licensing, we actually approve specific hours of operation. Are the specific hours included in the application? Frankly, I don't remember.
The application asked for the hours that they're proposing to operate, and then there has to be a decision, by the board. Could be a recommendation by this committee on those operating
Yeah,
hours.
I think I'd rather wait and let the Board of Selectmen themselves.
Well, that's fine. I just want to make it clear that there will be a point at which hours of operation will be considered.
I think the fact that this committee's highlighting for the Board of Selectmen that hours are an issue is
Sure.
the
Yeah.
extent we need to go to right
That's
now.
fine.
There were some questions raised about this last night, and
Yeah.
I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend the meeting due to other circumstances. But there seems to be a sentiment that there ought to be regular business hours. That is to say, open only during normal business hours, whatever those may be, making sure they're closed, say, 1 day a week. Unless I'm mistaken, I'm pretty sure that, say, pharmacies do not have those limitations. They typically are open more than, say, 9 to 5, and one of the reasons for that is because many people work during the day, and therefore they need to be able to go to a facility other than during normal working hours, and they may even need to go on a weekend. So I would just suggest that when the selectmen take this up, they give that some consideration as well.
Yeah, and I would even say that there were other people who said open evening hours was preferable to daytime because it would be less traffic impact. So
Well,
there are different views on that one, right?
that
Yeah.
might also assist with people who have concerns about the proximity of the facility to
Sure.
the old Lincoln School.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of
Yeah.
comments
Yeah.
about that. So,
Anyway, okay.
Okay, so those are all the asterisks that I made, but Peg?
Yeah, I had a couple of things. I don't think they need to go in the regulation. Well, one of them might. Somebody raised an issue about the signage about which doors are accessible, rather than, this was a letter from Frances
Yeah, there are
Fisher.
two, yeah.
She wanted to know about doors and whether there'd be more signs than needed to be. And the question was whether the door on Washington Street or something, I'm not sure.
Well, there is a formal entrance to the building that I understand will be closed, right? Not operable. And therefore, there's not going to be a sign there, or there won't be anything there, it just will be closed. And then the entrance will be around on the side.
But the regs are requesting that there be signs on all doors, and she wanted to just change it to make all used
Oh, I
doors.
see, because that sign, that door, being a door would be required.
Right, that was the point.
Got
And
it.
can you review the signage at the doorways for us, please? So,
Yeah, I'm not sure that I understood the last point, just before I do that. What was the point about the front door?
The main door to the bank
Yes.
will not be used will be closed, as
Right.
I understood it.
Yeah.
And so there seems to be some conflict between a requirement that there be a sign on each door, because that is a doorway.
Oh.
Yeah, and there doesn't, the request is that there not be a sign on that door, because
Yeah, so we certainly don't plan to put a sign on that door, except for that we're going to, and this is something that will go in front of the planning board, a little sign that's going to say the entrance is at the back. That's it. Because if somebody
Entrance at rear, a sign with an arrow saying entrance at rear, and that's it.
That's the plan.
Does that fit the way our regulations are worded?
I'm trying to find
We
that
should figure that
signage
one out.
language.
Find it.
Yeah, right.
We wanted to say accessible interest or entrances in use or something like that.
It's 24. The licensee shall conspicuously post signage at all entrances indicating that entry into the premises of the RMD by persons not possessing a valid registration card is prohibited.
so
Okay, but,
all
Yeah.
active, all
Utilized or used.
yeah,
Accessible means by people with
all
disabilities.
active.
active entrances? Right. Well, I did hear informally from one resident that what you should do is put a great big chain and a padlock on the door at the old main entrance to the bank, indicating that it was not an active entranceway.
We'll have to ask the Preservation Committee.
I think there were also a few concerns about the advertising element of signage. And I mean, that's something that's heavily regulated already by
Yeah.
DPH, and it's going to go through sign bylaw.
So I really wasn't going
Review
there,
by the- yeah.
because I know that the planning board does a great job with signage, so. Was there something else, Peg?
Yeah, the one other thing, I thought definitely doesn't need to be in the regs, but just for alert you to it, is Mary Lisa's suggestion that the town meeting members be notified when you're having community meetings. And I think that you should be aware of who the town meeting members are in the neighborhood there, and keep them informed about what's going on, because that's a great way
Thank
to
you.
work with the community.
I meant to
And,
highlight
and
that.
the truth is, it might as well be in the regs, because the notice, it's the form of notice. I would add that, because it's important.
But I would send it
No,
out to
no, it is.
not just
Yeah.
the ones in those three.
Yeah, you would,
So how should the requirement read? Are we saying the precincts at Marilis?
No, I think it should be
all-
all town meetings.
All town meeting?
yeah, right.
Just as
It's
an
on the
addition to the
website.
tab and whatever.
Can do it through the
Through by email, right?
website.
We don't-
Yeah.
By email.
Yeah.
Email.
And there are
It's a
email
list.
lists, there's
Okay.
ways you can do that easily.
Right.
Easy enough?
Thank you, Peg. I had started that last night, and I forgot it this morning, so. Anything further?
I'd just add one thing. I'm encouraged by what you said about education and disclosure, being more thorough and progressive about that. I would encourage you to talk about the handbook, look at your program, and it's a little bit outside of the purview, but web-based, not just a simple handout, and also multilingual translation so that you can be as thorough as possible from the education standpoint, the disclosure of safety.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that concludes our business for this morning. I think that,
Set up another meeting?
yeah, I think we do need one,
One more.
hopefully, last meeting. I think we're definitely nearing the end of this.
You want to do this sooner rather than later, correct?
Please.
So how long? Do you want to do it next week? Do you want to do it in 2 weeks? The only caveat to that is next week, doing 2 sets of minutes next, if we were to meet next week. 1 set of minutes might be done, but the other one might still be in. So the dates we have are Thursday the 2nd, Thursday the 9th, Thursday the 16th, and I know the week of the 20th is school vacation, so that's probably not a doable thing. So I don't know,
I think Thursday the 9th is probably the way to go.
Second I can't do, but the ninth I can do.
2 weeks.
April 9th?
April 9th at 8:30?
I can't do it.
I can't do any Thursday mornings. This happens to be school vacation
Oh,
for
those-
PG, so.
All right.
Um,
Well,
You want to try a different day? Do you want to try
Try a Wednesday?
a Wednesday?
I could not do the 8th.
Oh, okay.
Although I know Tuesdays make a long day for you guys, so.
I think we hopefully have very little to do with this at this next meeting, other than to put a final sale of approval. So I think we'll stick with Thursday the 9th, and
I won't be there.
you won't.
You don't have very
Or
much.
actually, well, Thursday, no, I'm sorry, Wednesday I can't do it.
Thursday the 9th. Okay, I think
8:30.
at 8:30. I think I'd like to stick with that because I think it hopefully will be a very short meeting.
Right, if we have the revised draft circulated well in advance, which
I'll
I'm
need
assuming we will.
I'll need the patient education materials. Because we're talking about edible conditions. And you had proposed, maybe it's covered already by the patient education materials.
I thought we were going to do it as part of the application that we're going to give of our patient education.
I had suggested you do it in advance, so for this discussion. Your argument, it's up to you, but your argument was we don't regulate us because we're already going to be doing this. And so-
Right, but we've created the patient we created the patient handbook, but there's a lot more work than I want to do before we open in 5 months. And I have a little bit of time until we do the application. I mean, we could put something together that's going to be good, but it's not going to be the final one. I want to spend some time thinking about it. I want to do a really good job on it.
So,
Well, can you give us like a draft version?
Absolutely.
That would help.
Yeah.
And assume that we'll find.
I mean, I suppose it's a work in progress. I mean, we're always going to improve it.
That's fine. I don't think it needs to be the final version, but it would give us some better
Yeah, that's fine.
indications.
So April 9th at 8:30.
And we're going to aim for here, I'll get that, or big, I'm sorry, big, the video. And this is accessible to anyone who cares to listen.
We're going to beg Dave to cover it.
Okay, thank you all. Our meeting is adjourned.